Hello there, I'm Greg Baker, the school superintendent, and this is an episode of What's Up, Doc. Generally, we have students interviewing me. Today, we're going to shift it up a little bit, and I'm going to interview some of our staff. Our topic today is around student discipline, student management, and how that works in the district. We often get asked questions about, when something happens. I often tell people we have, 10,000 kids in our family, and imagine having them all over at your house at the same time. A lot of stuff happens, and our staff works really hard to manage our kids, help them grow. They make mistakes, and inevitably we're dealing with things that people wonder about. What's the consequence? How come I don't know about it, or what is it? So we get asked a lot of questions. So today we're going to unpack a little bit of that, and joining us are three of our staff members. I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Dionte Thomas, the campus monitor at Squalicum High School.
I'm Alli Chryst, the principal at Shuksan Middle School.
I'm Jay Jordan. I'm one of our assistant superintendents.
Great. Well, thanks for being here. I know student discipline is something that you all have a role in. And as I mentioned, sometimes we hear from parents and staff, one of the things we often hear is like, oh, you don't discipline students, or you don't do it anymore. So I'd just like to your reaction, why do you think there's sometimes that misunderstanding from families or other folks about discipline in schools?
I get that question a lot as well. I think when I think about our kids and the way that we want them all to be treated and feel seen and safe, it not only has us focusing on the safety of a victim in a situation, but also the emotional safety for the person who is in trouble. And so we aren't able most of the time to share what consequences are given a different situations and things that come up in order to sort of protect the safety of that student. But it is really important that we have a common understanding of what is an appropriate consequence given the nature of whatever happened. And we have different policies and rubrics that help us stay in alignment with those things, but it isn't something that we're able to share, especially with parents or other students, in order to protect the safety of all of the students involved.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is often opposite of what our tendency is to be very transparent about almost everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I think building off that too, when there's a privacy piece, but obviously there's, information that gets around from students or their families about what our discipline might be in the schools. And I think there's this traditional understanding of what discipline looks like in school. And nowadays we have so many different tools that we utilize. And we have so many different interventions that we use that might not be the traditional out-of-school suspension or expulsion, but we have so many more things that we're doing in the school. So some people, it might not fit their view of what traditional discipline would look like, but for us, it's just, we try to use whatever tools we can to help educate these students and help them navigate these situations.
Yeah, our staff are intervening every day, supporting students, and a big part of our goal is to see growth, to see change. And we work closely with families, and we can assure people that we are intervening and taking action in all incidents. And as Alli said, some of that is kept private out of respect for the people that are involved. And like Dionte said, we have lots of tools at our disposal versus just the suspension, which people might be most familiar with. But our goal is to see change in behavior, and we take that really seriously. And that's why building strong relationships with all kids and families is an important part of that process.
And Jay, you've been with us for a number of years, and when you were principal, actually at Shuksan, we started a lot of work where, as you said, Dionte, it used to be suspensions, expulsions were one of the main tools in our tool belt, where we've really expanded that, and that's still used some.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a big goal of mine when I was working as a principal to lower the amount of time that kids were spending outside of school, passionately working hard to provide alternatives when kids needed correction. And it is important. Consequences are an important part of the process for all of us when we need to sort of change our behavior or make a change. But sending a student away from us is not an effective strategy strategy, even though it is at times needs to be used, and we do use them in our district. But building relationships, again, with students that might be having the most trouble regulating or being successful is a really effective strategy, and building an effective relationship with their parents so that we're working together to get that change. And I'm very proud of the work that our schools do use to think of other options to help students make those changes.
Thanks. Yeah. When you have something comes up and you, whatever role you're in, are investigating a situation, tell us a little about like what you're trying to accomplish when you're investigating something that's happened, and then you're trying to determine what is the appropriate discipline that might be used.
You go ahead.
Well, I think the first thing, we want to make sure we're getting it right. So I think the first part of the investigation piece that we're doing is making sure that we have the right people involved, we understand the scenario that's going on, so we kind of have a better idea on what interventions we might need to use. And so at times, that investigation period might take a little bit of time, but that's because we want to make sure we get it right. And that also helps kind of steer us in the direction of that appropriate intervention. And I think a key here when we talk about student discipline is the systems that we have in place. And that helps us all kind of have a similar approach across our schools. And we have documents and we have procedures that help guide us through maybe if it's a certain type of infraction, and helps steer us in a direction for maybe some disciplinary interventions that we could utilize. And so that investigation piece is really helpful in us figuring out what outcomes, one, we're trying to achieve, and also how to get there.
I think I would just, I would add, and I loved how you said, what are the outcomes that we want to have? And I think having all students feel safe and supported at school is always one of those outcomes, and that often looks like partnering with lots of different stakeholders. And so were there other kids that were affected? What do the parents think? Is there outside, counseling or support that we should be looping in? And so really taking the time to kind of look at the whole child in order, like you said, to figure out what exactly needs to be put in place, what's the best support plan that we can have to show the growth and that learning that we're hoping to find.
Great.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw out a couple of direct rumors or comments that I often hear, and I think, Jay, you kind of addressed this one a minute ago, but sometimes we don't ever do suspensions or multi-day suspensions or expulsions anymore. I think you said that we do, but it's limited. Any other, like, is that true? We still do them sometimes?
Yeah, we definitely do them because they do play an important role in also a part of the growth and development. Sometimes our students do need a break to reflect on what has happened. But we want to keep them close. We want to make sure we're staying in contact with our students. We don't ever want to send someone away that's needing to reflect and grow and not have someone there to process things with them. We do all the available suspensions that are allowed by the law, from short-term all the way to expulsions as needed based on the incident that has happened. But a big part of, I think, what we're trying to add here to the picture is that the other tools that we use, which could be conversations with a counselor, meetings with a mental health specialist, debriefing with an assistant principal. These are really important processes for helping students make change and shouldn't be dismissed as not effective, because they are.
So this kind of leads into the next one. We often hear, or some parents might say, they wish that the punishments that were harsher, were stronger. And what I heard you just kind of articulate, Jay, is it's probably, suspension, expulsion feels harsh, and it is, where these other things that we do I thought it's even more effective than that, but they maybe feel softer or not quite as, the hammer down. What do you think's behind the comments or the concerns like you're not being harsh enough or strong enough with the punishment?
My first instinct is that wanting, of a harsh punishment means that the behavior will change. I think that's kind of that thinking, that if they get a really strong punishment, then they'll learn that lesson and the behavior will change. But I think what we see oftentimes, that if we only are thinking about a suspension as a harsh punishment, that doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior will change. It's not giving the student a chance to really learn and understand the impact that they had. we think about the homes that our kids go home to a lot, or the places that they go home to, and that they don't all look the same. And for some of them, that would be a great thing to go home for 3 days and not be at school. For some of them, it wouldn't be a healthy or safe thing to go home for 3 days and not be at school. So if our goal is that students are learning how to have a change in their behavior, being able to assess by what we know about that kiddo and work with our team to initiate that change, that's what we're going to do. So even if it doesn't look harsh enough or extreme enough, we want to see that behavior change. And so we're going to take all these different steps to get to that end result.
Yeah. One of the areas that we've focused on quite a bit the last few years is incidents of hate and bias, and how do we make sure that we're addressing that head on. Could you maybe just talk to me a little bit about how we've worked on that, and what does this one look like in those types of situations?
Well, we've felt really supported as a district. We've had different trainings as a leadership staff and with our staff around the type of language and behavior that relate to hate and bias, and how to then help teach that to our students so they understand what dehumanizing language sounds like, what is appropriate at school and what is absolutely not. And so at Shuksan, we started a couple years ago. In the first month of school, myself and assistant principal go to every homeroom and we have those conversations with all students so they really understand what we mean when we're talking about hate speech and bias and the impact that that has. And so taking a proactive step we found is really helpful. And then every time something is reported, we respond the same as we would any other incident that would cause someone to feel unsafe at school. And again, that can look a lot of different ways, the type of consequences or learning. But at the end of the day, we want students to learn the impact of their language or whatever they're doing that is negatively affecting others. And then it can involve consequences when we think that that will help initiate a change in behavior.
And we should be intervening in every incident. That's what the training is informing our staff. And all of our staffs have gone through training, and we have, as Alli alluded to it, trainings for our students so that we're out there talking to students about the language that is not okay to be used, and to make sure that we're intervening every time, and that students are also helping call it out when it's not okay. When we're hearing language that's dehumanizing, it needs to stop.
A couple more questions. One is, this is a big one, but how does discipline generally look differently elementary to middle to high school? And maybe let's go elementary, middle, high, maybe.
Yeah, well, while there are some differences, I want to start with some things that are similar. And I know we've said it, but because it's such an emphasis in our district, but our principals and our school staffs are working so hard to create a positive, healthy culture for our children to be in. That's where this whole conversation about discipline starts, is about creating environments that kids love to be in, that they can thrive in, that they want to do their best. And when we have that, we can point to lots of positive places that kids can go and can direct their energy instead of doing things that are getting them in trouble. Clubs, sports, activities, relationships with teachers, relationships with friends. All of those things are critical, just to the foundation of what we're trying to do in our schools, and really impact the level of discipline or conflicts that we have.
Yeah, that kind of covers it all, but if there's anything anybody else wants to add, you've had different
I
experiences.
think we often hear from parents that, we have more options for consequences, or at least from their perspective, at the middle level than at elementary school. And I just want to acknowledge that I cannot imagine being an elementary school administrator. The work that they do with our little ones up to, fifth graders, like that's such a huge developmental leap. And what might be appropriate for a seventh or eighth grader wouldn't necessarily be appropriate as a consequence for a kinder or first grader. And so I feel really fortunate that we do have the consideration of a students' development at the forefront of our mind, as far as how will they learn, what is appropriate and acceptable, and that it should change between level, and that it does. Yeah.
Well, I think what you said when you're talking about developmental, like the stages that they're at, obviously that changes on the level, if it's elementary or middle or high, but even in the individual buildings and individual classrooms. students are at different stages in life, and especially when we start talking about high schools, they're really kind of pushing some boundaries and they're learning how to navigate their world. And so we're seeing a lot more autonomy in these students, and they're getting into different situations that they might not in the middle school or in the elementary school. So sometimes we have to be really creative in how we're approaching this. And some of the instances we're working with them on are some pretty serious things. And so I think it's really important to kind of tie all these systems together. It's the follow through, the education that we're trying to do. It's the consistency with identifying and always responding to any disciplinary incident or something that might come up. And also with high schoolers too, we talk about relationship with students and we talk about relationships with families, but we also have to have a good relationship with our community. And they have to feel comfortable contacting us about maybe things that they feel are unsafe that our students may do off campus, or a student conduct concern that they have heard about or seen maybe at a game after school. And so partnering with our community too to help address some of their concerns, I think also comes to light in the high school level as well.
As we wrap up, is there anything else that you think about what parents, or you might hear from parents or community about discipline that we didn't talk about today that you think would be important to share or articulate?
Well, I would just probably add a couple of the tools that people might not be familiar with, but our school staffs develop support plans for kids when they need them. And that can sometimes change a student's access to the hallways. It can maybe change the access to the lunchroom or recess or free time. It can restrict passing time. There's lots of tools that are at our disposal, and we're just trying to make sure folks know, because we've talked about it here about suspensions are a part of what's used in student discipline, but there are other tools. And those support plans are developed with students, with their families, that create even greater clarity for a student when they're at school about what's okay, what's not okay. And it's just one of the clear, being really clear with kids about what we need to see from them is an important step. And we know that in some of our schools it can feel like there's a lot of free time. And sometimes we have to sort of restrict that a little bit to help students until they're ready for more free time. So that's just one thing I wanted to lift up, because it's an important part of that concrete tool of the relationships that we're trying to build.
We talked a little bit about suspensions and that as a tool, and we also, you had mentioned kind of the investigation that we go into when we're working with student conduct or disciplinary concerns and kind of understanding what's going on. And that makes me think of safety concerns that we have in our schools too. So we talked a little bit about the process we go through to investigate and interview, and when it comes to student safety in our schools, really that happens after, if we have a real concern about our staff, our students being safe in a building, we might take that opportunity to have an individual leave our building and to ensure the safety of our building right away and follow up with that investigation process. And so we have time to slow down and do that properly. But I think it's also important to think about, when it comes to safety, that we respond very swiftly to those things. And so maybe right off the bat, we're doing something that gets that individual, off of our campus, so we have the time to investigate properly.
I guess I would just add, on the other end of things, the past few years as an entire middle level, really been focusing also on how can we lift up students who are making positive choices, and what does that look like as a preventative measure, I guess, to more discipline. And so thinking about, even field trips and whole school assemblies, and like, how are we building that positive culture as a whole school so everyone feels bought in. And then, like you mentioned, how when a student does do something that needs correction or some learning, how can we quickly get them reintegrated and re-involved? And so that's kind of part of the cyclical nature of the discipline process, is continuing to always see that growth. Yeah.
I'm remembering when I was a principal, and my assistant principal / counselor, who worked a lot on the student discipline, and I learned a lot from him. And I remember watching him, and when kids would come out of his office and they had some level of discipline, the magic was when they walked out and they turned to him and they said thank you, because it was a hard situation, there was consequences, there was this, but they could tell that he cared, loved those kids, and was helping them through a hard situation. And I find it interesting that some of our folks that work with student discipline the most are some of our most caring, loving people we have, and it's not just about a hammer, it's about leaning in to help this kid grow and be successful. So thank you all three for being here today, really appreciate it. And that is the ending of our What's Up Doc. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.